Right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming along today to be part of the Friends of Parks Forum. My name is Nicole Halsey and I'm from URPS, and I'm helping out today by facilitating today's meeting. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm coming to you today from Kaurna land, but I recognise that given we're from all around the state and possibly interstate, we are on all sorts of country today. The format of today's session is we will have a series of presentations as well as some breakout room discussions. And we also have the Minister with us today who will be providing some opening words in a moment. You would have noticed that in the lead up to this forum, you were provided with a survey asking you about what sort of things might interest you in discussing at the forum. And so we have compiled those questions, and when we get to our QA session with some of our decision makers, including the Executive Director of National Parks and Wildlife Service, Mike Williams, when we get to that session, we'll be drawing on some of those questions, but throughout the whole session, I encourage you to put any questions or comments into the chat as well, and I'll be trying to field those as best I can, given the time constraints. Alrighty, I will now hand over to Duncan Mckenzie, President of Friends of Parks, to open our meeting and provide some initial words. Thanks, Duncan.
I'd like to thank you all for joining today. The board has supported trying a different format this year because of the COVID problems, etc. And this online format has been used in a number of AGMs around the country, and a lot of the organisations that have used this particular format are now sticking with it rather than having face-to-face meetings, because those organisations that are spread across the state, etc., it's virtually impossible for everybody to get to a face-to-face meeting, but they can certainly get into an online one. And today we've got 80 people registered, so I hope you're going to enjoy the presentation, and I certainly appreciate all the work that's been put in to arrange this forum. I'd certainly like to formally welcome the Minister for the Environment and Water, David Spears, with his tie there. It must be a parliamentary day today, is it, David? As you know, the Minister's a big supporter of Friends of Parks this year and has significantly increased the funding available to our groups with, I think, the largest grant program we've ever had for Friends of Parks. It's a total of $750,000. Last year we had, what was it, 130,000. We've gone up to 750. 250,000 of these were for small grants and 500,000 for the partnership grants. We received 96 applications for over $445,000 worth of the small grants rounds. These have been finalised, and groups are currently being notified of the outcome. We did receive 46 applications for over 2.12 million for the partnership grants. That's where we had that 500,000 set aside, and we're in the final stages of assessing these. So thank you, Minister, for your ongoing support for Friends of Parks and being a brilliant partner, and thank you for being here to speak with us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning. And as Duncan recognised, I am wearing a tie, which is not too usual outside of parliamentary sitting, which means we are in parliamentary sitting week. Hopefully, the last parliamentary sitting week before the election. Some people think that politicians should spend more time in Parliament. I am absolutely opposed to such views. You get very little work done in there. It's a waste of time, and you can do far more out and about, meeting with communities and working with my officials to get things done. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of wherever you are today, and like Nicole, I'm on Kaurna land and would like to recognise the special relationship the Kaurna people have with their land, but also the huge importance that they put on environmental sustainability and healing of country, which of course was the theme of NAIDOC Week 2021. I am now coming to the end of my 4th year as Environment Minister. It puts me as one of the longest serving environment ministers in our state's history. We've environment ministers in this state since the early 1970s. And it has been a great privilege to be the state's environment minister. I'm realistic. My time is coming to an end in all likelihood as the state's environment minister. But I'm not just hopeful that I've left this organisation and this portfolio in a better place than where I found it. I back myself 100% that I have. When I walked through the door of the building on Weymouth Street on the 22nd of March, 2018, I walked into an organisation where morale was rock bottom, funding was diminished after 16 years of catastrophic cuts, where the Environment Department had endured a 60% reduction in its budget. And actually the National Parks and Wildlife Service, probably the part of the organisation you've got most personal connection with as Friends of Parks, had suffered an even bigger cut to its budget. Ranger numbers down from 300 to 93. The National Parks and Wildlife Service as an entity subsumed into the bureaucracy and diluted away to nothing. Campsites, toilet blocks, access pathways closed because we didn't have enough money to invest in them. And so my job first was to stabilize a failing budget, to end the cuts and to start building on it. I'm very realistic that the proportion of the environment budget compared to other parts of government may not have significant proportional increases relative to the health budget, which continues to grow. To put it into perspective, the health budget today is $7 billion. The Environment Department's budget is about 300 million. I often think the health budget might actually be able to be reduced a little if we increased our environment budget by a little bit, and perhaps I looked a bit more at well-being and getting people into nature as opposed to dealing with the cures at the end of the system. However, there are some good programs in that vein now bubbling up, including the Healthy Parks, Healthy People partnership between the Health Department and the Environment Department, which is seeking to do things like prescriptions for parks, recognizing the value of our national parks and encouraging people to get into them, as well as trying to rebuild and reposition the department and give the department and our volunteers, importantly our volunteers, support and capacity to do more things. I've really felt that I've benefited hugely from an aligning of the planets. I think that awareness of the natural environment and the need to preserve and invest in it has grown markedly at a societal level during my time as minister. And also the COVID-19 pandemic has been a huge driver for people to connect with nature and to give them a desire to get into outdoor places and spaces. In fact, most states in Australia made the decision to close their national parks and conservation parks and protected spaces and the bleak period of the pandemic. And by that, I mean March, April, May 2020. South Australia was certainly one of very few jurisdictions and definitely the only jurisdiction to both keep our parks open, but to actively encourage people to get into them. With our Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Nicholas Spurrier's support, we push forward with a marketing campaign to say to people, this is your time to explore a local park, get into a park you haven't been to before, learn about it and have that as your escape during COVID. We pitched that publicly and we saw huge results out of it. At one point, our visitation to parks was up 120% across the state. And that has settled out at a much higher level than pre-pandemic visitation. And that's going to be occurring, I believe, on an ongoing basis. I believe that has contributed to the most significant growth in our Friends of Parks in recent times, more volunteers signing up as they've gotten to understand parks in their local area and have developed a relationship with both the park as a geographical place and a place for our environment, but also our parks as a place for community and connection as people meet new friends, connect with neighbours and particularly use friends groups groups for a social and community development benefit, as well as a way to contribute to the conservation values of our natural environment. Many people who've heard me speak before would know that my journey into politics, into public life, came via founding Friends of the Lower Field River down in the south of Hallett Cove back in 2006. And that led to me running for Marion Council in 2010, entering State Parliament in 2014, and then getting re-elected and becoming the Environment Minister in 2018. So I've got a great understanding, but also place huge value on the role of volunteers, and know that the government will never, and in my view, definitely should never do all the work in our parks. Our parks are not about the government. They're not about the minister. I am the steward of our national parks, 21% of the state for a season, for 4 years between 2018 and 2022, if I make it through another few weeks. And I fully intend to, by the way, but you just never know in this job. But I am a steward for a short period of time. It is our friends groups that will endure much longer than political cycles and the standing of government. It's our friends groups that will create relevance of parks in the communities in which those parks are found, from one end of the state to the other. It's our friends groups that will welcome people into our parks, that will teach people about them, that will tell people about their value, will inspire them to want to protect our parks and expand our protected areas system. And I am delighted to have seen our protected areas system expand by park after park after park during my time as minister, whether it's Idiacker on the Alpena National Park, Glenthorne National Park. In the coming days, we will proclaim Hindmarsh Valley National Park on the southern Fleurieu Peninsula. We're expanding our network. We are expanding our capacity. We are lifting the community's knowledge and understanding of the value of these parks. We're upgrading park classifications. Deep Creek Conservation Park is no longer. From last Thursday, it is Deep Creek National Park. Cleland Conservation Park, so well known by so many Adelaideans and visitors, is no longer Cleland Conservation Park. It is Cleland National Park since last Thursday. And we are now home to the largest national park in Australia, a national park close to the size of Scotland, Mckenzie Simpson Desert National Park. Another place that we can be immensely proud of to have within the boundaries of South Australia. But we couldn't do it without our friends groups. And I have sought to support you at every step of the way. When I became minister, our grant scheme supporting friends were $60,000 a year. We were able to get that up to $90,000 a couple of years later. And then we turbocharged it to $750,000 per annum. And I say per annum because although this is the first year for it, it's my intention that should a Liberal government be re-elected in this state, that will continue on an ongoing basis. At the same time, we legislated that landscape boards must provide grassroots grants. Those grant schemes can't be cut without legislative change. And we've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars provided to friends groups across the state through the availability of grassroots grants through the landscape boards as well. So we're giving you capacity and access to resources. And I hope that we're giving you a level of confidence that you've got a government, a minister, and a department in the Environment Department and the National Parks and Wildlife Service that's got your back, wants to provide you with the support, and completely 100% appreciates the incredible work that you do across the Parks estate. So enjoy today's forum. Duncan Mckenzie, thanks for your leadership. We've got Mike Williams, the Director of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, on the line as well. Thanks, Mike, for what you do. And I look forward to hearing how the forum goes today, as well as catching up with many of you as I'm out and about visiting our national parks and our friends groups. Good morning.
So we're going to move into our first presentation for the day, folks. And today we have Sharon Smith. She's the Chief Executive Officer from Wildcare in Tasmania. And Sharon, we were just discussing, is in the beautiful Hobart, a beautiful place in the world, as is where we are today in South Australia. But Sharon, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about Wildcare Tasmania.
Thanks very much, Nicole, and good morning, everybody. As I said, as Nicole said, very happy to answer any questions later. And I will just share my screen now. So this is all about Wildcare Tasmania, and we're a not-for-profit charity in Tasmania, and our aim is to care for wild places, wildlife and cultural heritage. And I'd just like to start by recognising the deep natural and cultural history of this ancient land that we're privileged to live on. And I pay my respects to Australia's Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and custodians, and I value their culture and wisdoms. And I certainly hope we continue to stoutly on our journey to truth-telling about our history. So just what is a Wildcare in a snapshot? So just over 20 years old, founded in 1997. It originated from within the Parks and Wildlife Service, actually within Tasmania. So it was an initiative of state government, but Wildcare now is not part of government. So a completely separate organisation, but we work very closely with Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. So a registered charity with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. And we're also a registered environmental organisation. We're authorised to collect tax-deductible donations we've got a Tasmanian Nature Conservation Fund, which we run. And we're also an incorporated association. And I'll mention that because we have an interesting model in that we have 60 volunteer groups, and most of those are not incorporated in their own right. So they are within the incorporation of Wildcare as the entity. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So this is, apologies for the quality of this slide, I've extracted it from another document. But sort of the Wildcare model in a nutshell is really around three things, and we try to bring those three things together to create impact. So the donors that we have, that we try to support through our platform, see those as the root system of the tree, and they're providing the nutrients that power the tree. So our members, and I'll talk a bit more about those, are the trunk, and we have a very small staff team, so just over 2 FTE staff, and we see those as the trunk. So we try to provide the structure of the tree, and those things enable our volunteer groups to have the party in the branches, and everyone's breathing life into conservation and preservation of Tasmania's wild places. So the Wildcare model, I was just asked to give you a bit of an overview of how the Wildcare model works. So as I mentioned, we have 60 volunteer groups. That fluctuates over time. As I imagine in your network, it does as well. But in general, our trend is up. So we're finding that interest in volunteering is increasing. And certainly the demand for our services is increasing. So that's creating, well, it's a joyful thing. It's also creating a few financial pressures for us as well. We've got about 3,500 members, and the members are people who have ticked through our website to join Wildcare, and it costs $25 per year to join Wildcare. And once you get on the network, we will email you, and we hope that people renew their membership. So that $25 per annum doesn't go into our donations fund, it goes into the Wildcare operating account, and that helps to run the Wildcare organisation. So of the 3,500 members, there's about 1,500 members who have clicked to join a group through our website. So the thing that we aim to do through our website is we aim for it to be a bit like a marketplace, where it's very interactive, and we aim for the home page to be very lively. It's driven by the efforts of groups, and we aim for people to be able to do things through the website. So people can go and visit each of the group pages on the website, and they can click to join a group directly through that website. And then that puts them on that group's emailing list. And yeah, so we have donors and fundraisers. I mentioned a little bit about that. So in all of those things, with our 2.3 staff, the model that we aim to do is to provide services to the groups that really empowers them and enables them to get on and do what they do best, which is, as I'm sure you want to get out and do the on-ground work. So the Wildcare model is based actually around a centralised financial system. So our groups actually have their finances managed centrally by Wildcare. So we have a bookkeeper as part of our 2.3 staff, and we also contract an accountant for our financial reporting. And so within the Wildcare operating account, we actually run 60 sub-accounts, if you like, which are for each of the 60 groups. And within our website, it's actually a very highly customised website. I mentioned the marketplace. There's also quite a hive of activity in the back end of the website. So our CRM system allows groups, and we run certain levels of access, allows group leaders to access in behind the website and to actually use our CRM system to communicate with their members. Email them. It keeps a record of the emails, to load documents, reports, news stories, and they can also load events to the online calendar. So it's sort of quite interactive. I suppose some people might think there's a bit of a risk in that sort of model, in that you're giving quite a number of people the ability to put things onto your website. In reality, we've never had an issue where we've had to take anything down from the website. Obviously, as administrators, we would retain control to be able to remove anything if needed. That has never happened. So I certainly think if you put trust in people and you're supporting them, and we've got a code of conduct, and you support them to do the right thing, I'm certainly an optimist, and I think people do the right thing. And yes, through the stories, leaders can tag group members so that group members will know when a story's been loaded, or when a new event has been loaded onto the website, or when a newsletter's coming out. And we also try to support our groups through leadership. So we're very big on strong leadership, to be collaborative to group members, but also being well organised, conscious of safety, and well supported to deal with any issues that may arise, and also well supported to liaise with the land managers so that there's really productive relationships with land managers. That's a really big thing that we give a lot of focus to. And we found, probably if I could comment on that, probably a journey with that over the last few years, so sorry, 3 to 4 years. I think we've really improved in that area, and that has had huge time saving for us. We just don't have the problem solving, if you like, as much anymore. Groups are really functioning positively with land managers, so that's really worth the effort, I think. We have biannual grants through our Tasmanian Nature Conservation Fund, which groups can apply for. We also run skills training, depending on what groups want, what's current, brush cutter, chem cert, whatever it is. We also give them access to a member services coordinator. So we provide access to whatever they need, services and support. So this isn't live, but just to give you a bit of a snapshot of what the website looks like. So this is a sort of a section of our home page. And so what we aim to do there is to have the latest news popping up. And as I said, the groups can load things there, so that those stories there are largely driven by groups. There's also an events calendar which says what's coming up. And so for anybody landing on the website, say a member of the public who's not a member of Wildcare, they can land there, and if they get interested and they click on an event, and oh gee, I think that's something I'd like to get involved with, they can click there, and then it will say, well, you need to be a member to join up, and segue them to joining as a member. Yes, and we also, you know, this part of the page is cut off from this, so it's joining as a member, donate, supporting a volunteer group or a gift shop. This top tab here, volunteer, takes people through to the full list of groups. So if anybody's got any time, you know, they can sort of spend time scrolling through each of the group pages, joining groups if they want to. There's no limit on the number that they can join. So now I just thought I'd just give you a bit of an overview of what funding support we try to provide to power the efforts of groups. So I think I mentioned the tax deductible donations and grants from the Tasmania Nature Conservation Fund. So there's 11 causes there that people can donate to, anybody can donate to it. And we run a twice annual grants program, which groups can apply for funds to support their projects. We also run a parallel fundraising option, which is we call branch fundraising, because it's not tax deductible. It doesn't go into the pure Tasmania Nature Conservation Fund. It goes direct into the group accounts. And if you remember, I said we've got 60 group accounts within our operational account. And so that's enabled through an online credit card contribution. And we make it very clear that it's not tax deductible because it's going direct to group accounts. Interestingly, I'll mention a little bit if there's time, that side of things has really grown in the last year. Since COVID, our donations have dropped off a bit, but our branch fundraising has really increased quite significantly. And we also let groups showcase any fundraising products through our gift shop. When I say any, we obviously assess those to make sure that there's proper quality, but again, we've never had an issue. And we run expos each year where we provide a forum for groups to come along and exhibit what they do and have a Q&A session to allow people from the public to find out how to get involved. So it's just a little idea of what this is part of what the shop looks like. People can browse, and all of these things are just amazing. The products that groups come up with, amazing artists and things that are in the network. And then that's just a little look through as to what there's a couple of pages cobbled there. So through the branch page, there's a little tab that says branch fundraising. If somebody wanted to support that group, if they click there, it would then go through to give them a credit card option. So yeah, just to finish, I thought I would just give you my sort of frank observations and reflections on how the Wildcare model works. The things I love about it are that it really empowers people. And as I said, we do try to aim for that marketplace, which I think really works, and people do the right thing when they feel like they're being trusted and respected. Recent observations, as I said, donations have dropped off a bit during COVID, but interestingly, yeah, the branches are going gangbusters using the other element of the web portal that we provide with the branch fundraising. So it's interesting that philanthropists are maybe wanting to give direct to groups that they know what they're working on. And also, the shop sales are also going absolutely gangbusters. So groups have been really creative. So along with that increase in activity, as I mentioned, volunteering's also increased. Our costs have increased, and a position that we've always had is to take a zero fee cut from donations or branch fundraising. So at some stage we might have to have a look at that, which will be a sad day if we do have to introduce small fee cut, but at the moment we're sticking pretty strongly to that. So that really the Wildcare way, volunteers driving results, collaborative partnerships with land managers, with other organisations who support us, lean overheads and donations making a difference. So that's the end from me. I will just stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Sharon. It's always wonderful just to hear how other states are approaching, you know, looking after our lovely natural environments. Sharon, we've had a couple of questions and I'm hoping you're happy just to stick around for a couple of minutes and respond to them, if that's okay.
Yes, for sure.
The first one is around, do the groups work across both public and private land, or is it only in parks?
It's both. So as I said, Wildcare originated from parks. So we're strongly aligned to public lands that are managed through the Parks and Wildlife Service. And I'd estimate that about 2/3 to 3/4 of the groups are working at least partly on Parks and Wildlife Service managed land. But there's about a quarter to a third who are working on council managed land or some private managed land.
Sharon. And another question was, people are interested to know how the organisation records and reports on project outcomes, things like volunteer time, I guess impact on the ground, that sort of thing. Is there an acquittal process for grants, for example?
Yes, there is. We've got an acquittal form. Actually, it's available on our website. So on the home page of our website, there's a little important documents tab right down the bottom. So within there's a whole collection of documents, and within there's our grant application form and also our grant acquittal form, if anybody wanted to see that. And in terms of reporting on projects and outcomes, yes, that's a great question. It's actually something that we've been gradually improving this year. We felt that we weren't doing particularly well with that. We were a little bit haphazard. We're very good at storytelling, but we felt that organisationally we weren't really pulling together all of the outcomes in a really compelling way. It was a little bit haphazard. So we've just a couple of months ago actually just started that process, and we did a survey of groups to find out firstly the types of things that they were working on. I mean, within the office, and we sort of know what they're working on, but that's given us some really good data as to all of the types of things. So we did get some surprises, and now we're doing the next stage, which is establishing some quantitative measures in consultation with the groups, which we will then continue to monitor those statistics on. It's an interesting one because we don't want to create a burden or a stress on groups, but so we're going to really be quite targeted and only probably select 3 or 4 things that will be headline outcomes results rather than trying to collect everything.
Sharon, a question about I think was it the Wild School Model? Is that
yes.
Right? Do you have some more information about the success of that? And it might be something to share after today's session, but is there any other information you could share about that as a model and why it's been successful?
Yeah, look, to be honest, the Wild School Model is now probably transitioned to more something that's been run by Parks and Wildlife Service. So the way that the model worked was that Wildcare's role was actually really to provide funding to Parks and Wildlife Service, in our instance, to run the Wild School Model. And it was a program of providing education to schools about nature, conservation, that sort of thing, and getting them involved pretty hands-on. The students were pretty hands-on with that. Yeah, so the Wild School Model isn't really a really active program for us at the moment. It's sort of through COVID, it sort of took a back seat as well, but I'm happy to give some more information after the session if need be.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Sharon.
Now,
folks, we have got a minute or 2 left with Sharon. If anyone has a question, perhaps pop your hand up if you know how to do that along the chat, along the bottom, or else physically, and I'll just quickly have a look through. But also feel free to enter anything into the text, into the chat spot. But Marianne, I might throw to you if that's okay, put you on the spot for a second. What's your reflections on what you've just heard from Sharon, given, I guess, the model that we have here in South Australia?
Thanks, Nicole. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marianne Healy. I'm sort of newly involved with Friends of Parks. I work here in National Parks and Wildlife Service. My title is Director of Community and Nature Partnerships. So I work with Duncan and with Jill and others. I guess for me, I think that there's some things that we can maybe borrow and think about from the Wildcare model that we might be able to look at. Some of the ways of, well, even just looking at the website and some of the functionality that we might be able to explore a bit more. I'm still learning about some of the things that we do and the way that we do them, but I do think that there's some real opportunity there. I think the connection with members and being able to really communicate well with members and engage with them is great. And then some of the fundraising and the way that you do some of the sort of targeted campaigns, I guess, or the opportunity for that. I wanted to ask you about the breadth of groups, Sharon. Are they all like your members or the different groups that are involved? Are they all sort of friends of a particular park, or are some of them species or?
Yeah, it's hugely diverse, and so it's really hard to categorise. So yes, there are some groups that are built up, you know, around particular national parks, but really it all starts from a passion, and that can be around a species. We've got, you know, for example, Friends of Lily Cove penguins who have been for, you know, multiple decades caring for a particular penguin colony. We've got some really adventurous groups who go onto very remote islands and also look after lighthouses. And we've got groups caring for wildlife. We've got wildlife rehabilitators. We've got track work experts, just hugely diverse. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon.
Can I just, yes.
Sure.
You mentioned that when people make donations, you've got about 11 nominations they can make as to where the funds will go.
Yes.
We're looking at doing something like that with our gift fund, but according to the Tax Act, once you make a donation, that's it, full stop. You cannot, if you're getting a tax receipt, you cannot then dictate how that money is to be spent. So I just wonder, have you had any problems that way, or anybody from the tax office investigate you?
No, not at all. No, our setup is totally in consultation with the tax office, and particularly when I set up the branch fundraising option a couple of years ago, sort of obviously was in close consultation with the tax office. I think the thing that to think about with that clause that, you know, donors cannot dictate, the primary underpinning of that is conflict of interest. So you don't want donors being able to dictate that their funds go towards something, so they get a tax deduction, and then you don't want them to dictate that their funds go towards something where they might actually get a financial benefit if they're running a business or something that would benefit from it. So we have just got general causes. So for example, Tasmanian devils is one of the causes. So money that goes into that cause, we know that the donors are particularly passionate about care and conservation of Tasmanian devils. They are not prescribing what the grants assessment committee decides in terms of the projects that money would go to. So it's still definitely the governance process with our grants assessment committee, where they assess all the applications, they decide whether the application meets the terms of being a registered environmental organisation, and essentially the donor has given their indication and their preference, if you like, but it's not binding the committee in any way. Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon.
Well, that's the main point.
Sharon, we're just coming to our end of time with you, but can I ask you hopefully two quick questions, which are short answer. Do you have a member attending to your website full time?
Have a member
or a person? Is someone staffing the website full time, or is
website? No, certainly not. So we don't have any full-time staff. We're all part-time, and so that adds up to the 2.3 people. We do have a web hosting company who manages our website, and our model with that is that we communicate with them every month. We have a monthly meeting and we say, we'd like this to happen. This isn't working well. We've got a new idea about this, and they enact it.
Great. And the final one, does Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service fund wildcare, and do councils provide funding when groups are working on council land?
Council land, yeah. So Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service, we've got a deed of agreement with Parks and Wildlife Service, so they do provide us sort of a limited amount of funding through a grant deed, which we've for. The councils don't provide. We don't have any sort of similar deed of agreement at the moment with the councils, but we have actually thought about doing with that, particularly for some of the councils where we're getting more and more groups in that particular area. So that's a bit of an evolving space. Yeah.
Wonderful. So Sharon, thank you very much for taking time today to talk to us about wildcare in Tasmania and what's going on. It's always useful to hear from interstate models and learn from them and share information that might help our thinking here in South Australia about Friends of Parks. So really appreciate your time today.
Pleasure. And Thanks. Good luck to you all. Thank you as volunteers for everything that you do. Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon.
Okay, bye.
Alrighty, folks. So for the next half hour or so, we've got a great session, I suspect, which is essentially sort of Q&A on the couch with some of the key decision makers within the Friends of Parks sort of remit. We have Mike Williams, who is the Executive Director of National Parks and Wildlife Service. We have Stuart Paul, who's Director of Operations within the service. And we also have Duncan Mckenzie, President, Friends of Parks. And so what we would like to do now is spend the next half hour or so hearing from them in response to some questions that people like yourselves have submitted. So, Marianne, have you got your hand up there?
I have. Sorry, Nicole. I just wanted to jump in. I should have said this at the start. John Schutz, Chief Executive, really had hoped to be here today and hasn't been able to. So I did my apologies for being so late in making that apology. We had hoped that he would be able to join us, but he is unable to. So he apologises and gave us his best wishes. So I just wanted to
No worries.
make an apology.
No worries. Thanks very much for that, Marianne. So as I mentioned in the opening words, in the lead up to this forum today, Friends of Parks members were asked to put forward some key questions that they, I guess, would like answered by some of our leaders. And we've compiled those and I've got them in front of me. But I might kick off with Mike with a bit of a softer question for you, Mike, to start with. We asked the group in the first breakout room discussion just to talk a little bit about their favourite park. And I wondered, Mike, if you could lead us off with your favourite spot and why?
That's a really tough question, Nicole. I was saying to the breakout group when we met, look, I'm in the fortunate position to be the Director of National Parks and Wildlife Service and travel the whole state looking at the wonderful array of parks we've got. And it's a really challenging question to answer for me to pick a favourite. But so like I would say at the start, I think the network of parks we've got in the state is quite unique and amazing. Having just been to some of our offshore islands and frequently visiting Kangaroo Island, just recently doing a trip across the Simpson Desert, heading up to southern Flinders this week, it never ceases to amaze me the variety of landscapes that we have to offer from both a biodiversity point of view and a recreation and open space and protected area network. But if I was to land on a favourite, I would probably land with the Flinders. I think the Flinders Ranges is quite unique, and hence why we're trying to have the Flinders listed as a World Heritage Area. And I've done a lot of work in the semi-arid parts of Australia, and I think the Flinders Ranges is quite unique, particularly its geology and landforms and the associated wildlife. So that would be where I land, but that's not doing, that's probably doing a disservice to many other fantastic places we've got in the state.
we won't take offence to that, Mike. The Flinders is a special place, and certainly it's just so restores your soul when you're there. It's one of my favourites. Stuart, Paul, I might bring you in here if that's okay. Ask you the same question before we launch into our real questions. What's your favourite park in South Australia? Stuart, can you hear us? I can't hear you, Stuart.
He's not on the screen. He's not on the screen.
I can see Stuart, Paul.
Oh.
Yeah, I can too, but he's.
There you go, Stuart. Are you muted or unmuted? Stuart, I'll just jump to somebody else. We can't hear you at the moment. You're not unmuting, so perhaps if you wouldn't mind just logging in and out, that might help. Duncan Mckenzie, I can't see you. I know you're here. You're probably on my second screen. What's your favourite spot? And remember to unmute, Duncan.
One guess, Glue Pot Reserve, but outside of that, probably, I don't know, Innes would have to be. The Friends of Parks had their forum up there a few years ago. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
beautiful area, scenery, the birds, animals.
Lovely.
Incredible.
Great. Alrighty, thanks for that, and hopefully we'll get Stuart Paul back on in a minute with sound. So Mike, I might lead off with you, and we'll just cut straight to the chase. I think this is something that's often of interest to the members, and certainly we got a lot of comments and questions about this in that leading up the survey leading up to today. It's obviously been great to see an increase in funding for grants this year. Will that continue?
Well, Nicole, you heard what the minister said. It's every intention, if the minister gets the government gets re-elected, this minister or whoever replaces him, their intention is to continue this grant program. So that will lay a fantastic foundation for the Friends groups across the state. If we continue to inject $750,000 a year into the Friends movement, that will allow us to really set up some long-term ongoing projects that will be of huge benefit to the park network. So I'll take the minister on his word. He's committed and passionate about supporting Friends, and I've got no doubt that this commitment will roll over in the next term of the government.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. And Stuart, I think I can see you've changed rooms. Hopefully your technology is going to work. I might throw to you now, if that's okay. Perhaps a quick comment on your favourite park, and then I'll throw you a different curly question.
All right. Can you hear me? Thanks,
yes,
Nicole.
We can. You're on.
All right. I've jumped in on Marianne's iPad for a second. Yeah, my speaker was working fine in the breakout room. We had a good chat, and I think we spoke about the rangers and staff having 360 favourite parks across the state. A bit like Mike's perspective. Look, I'm going to say last week for the first time, I threw a wetsuit on and jumped in Ewan's Ponds down at Ewan's Ponds Conservation Park in the Lower Limestone Coast between Mount Gambier and Port Macdonald. And for those who haven't done that before, that is a unique experience. You've got to have a decent wetsuit, but the current just carries you downstream between a few different ponds and native freshwater fish, the endangered spiny crayfish. Lots of good conversation down there around wetlands, the extent of wetlands and challenges we have with groundwater and wetlands in the lower southeast. But that was a great experience. I don't know if I'd say it's my favourite park, but it's one of the most unique park experiences that we have. So yeah, thanks for that opportunity. And yeah, good to see everyone today and good to be with you.
Thanks, Jill. And I could see Jill Haddon on your vivid, nodding very, very vigorously to that comment about the park. So Stu, I'll bring you back in a sec, but I might just throw to Duncan about the role of Friends of Parks Inc. and its relationship with Friends of Parks Group. What is that relationship, Duncan? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How does Friends of Parks Inc. relate to the broader Friends of Parks Group network?
Well, I guess the board undertakes the administration, the overall administration for Friends of Parks, etc. We work very, very closely with DEW. I'm sorry, but they're an absolutely incredible partner. We couldn't have any better. We undertake advocacy on behalf of the 143 groups. At the moment, the pastoral bills, new pastoral draft bills causing quite a headache. The native vegetation changes to that, or proposed changes to that. So we've got people attending groups that are looking at that at the moment. The St Kilda mangroves destruction area. Again, we've got people working in groups there. We're providing grants to the now $750,000 to the group. So that's really incredible. The scholarships program, we offer scholarships each year to schools, etc. We're in partnerships with like organisations, for instance, the Conservation Council, Trees for Life, the Nature Conservation Society. Then we work with DEW, the South Australia Nature Alliance. We're represented on all of those and many, many other committees. So a lot of work's undertaken in the background that you don't necessarily get to know about, but that's what we do. And we work, as I said, very closely with Pam, Jill, Ian, and now Marianne. Welcome addition to keep it rolling on. And without DEW's assistance, Friends of Parks couldn't exist. That's the story. So we do a lot in the background.
Thanks, Duncan. And just thinking, obviously, many people who are online today are volunteering, and as Sharon said earlier, thank you for all your great work. We couldn't do it without you. So, Stu, at the moment, clearly we're working within a very challenging context with the COVID pandemic. What's going on around COVID safety for volunteers working in parks at the moment?
Thanks, Nicole. Look, I'll just chip in. There might be some follow-up comments or questions here, but look, if I take a step back, a couple of years ago when we first started dealing with COVID and our relationship with Friends of Parks, volunteers in parks, of course, we said right from the start that we really want to be able to continue the strong relationship that we have and support Friends of Parks to do their good work across our regions and parks. The messaging right from the start from our minister, from the state government, was very much about get out and about in our parks and enjoy being in our parks. It's good for your health, it's good for your mental health, physical health. And of course, our parks have been busier than ever over the last couple of years. So in many ways, that's a bit of a silver lining, if you like, of COVID. And it's provided us with this amazing opportunity to engage with visitors and the public across our parks and talk about the work we do and raise awareness of our role and the great work that we do in partnership with Friends of Parks. So all along the way, we've said, look, we do defer to the Department of Health COVID guidelines. And some of those we're really familiar with, of course. So staying home if you're not well, getting a COVID test, isolating until you've got your test results is something that we're all familiar with. And we're also fairly well practiced, I think, now with the hygiene and social distancing requirements associated with the way we go about our work. And we think about the way that applies when volunteers and groups of volunteers come together to work with us in parks. So I've been at a few events and activities lately where there are good standards of personal hygiene, where we don't share food and drinks together. People bring their own along to an event. Another thing that's come up lately is when we have an activity leader that's working in a park with a group of participants on a working bee or a work activity, that if we can have one person, perhaps the activity leader, sign everyone into that activity rather than asking everyone to bring their own pen, for example. So there's some simple things like that around hygiene, around social distancing. And of course, we as an agency strongly encourage all of our volunteers working with us to be vaccinated, although we respect that that's an individual choice and it's not something that our department mandates. One other point, Nicole, I think that's worth making is that the latest advice, of course, is to give proper consideration to whether face-to-face meetings, particularly indoor meetings, are critical or not. And if they could be shifted to an online environment, or if they're not critical, or if they can be delayed for a period of time, then I think it's up to the executive, if you like, or the committees of our groups to consider that when they're considering the face-to-face meetings. But I do feel that we're pretty well accustomed and practiced now to making sure we're complying with all of those guidelines around safe work, when we're out and about on the ground in our parks, working in teams and groups. So I might just leave it at that, given this is quite a broad and complex space. Okay.
For sure. And I do know there's a sort of a question here that links to some of that, which is, what is the legal position of a Friends of Parks group requires its members attending an on-park activity to be vaccinated against COVID? And I guess that's one of the tricky spots. And I think you mentioned at the moment, we certainly haven't had it mandated by government in South Australia, but I've seen a big shift in the private sector where I work, which is essentially taking control and saying, you know, if you want to come into our office or meet with us face to face, you need to be double vaxxed. But I'm not sure there is a legal position at the moment. Stu, is there around this? And it hasn't really been tested. But I guess what we might say, if I can put it out there, is the best form of defence is to encourage people to be double vaxxed. But if you are in a non-park activity, which presumably is outside, there's much more scope to be socially distanced and practice some safe practices compared to an indoor type meeting scenario.
That's right. We've had thousands of volunteers working across our parks over the last couple of years, making sure that we're complying with these guidelines and being sensible about the way we go about it. So thanks for your support and continued effort in a COVID context.
Yeah. So Mike, I might throw to you now. There were a lot of different questions that came. Well, there were quite a similar themes in a way, but a lot of people responded with questions in the lead up to today's forum. And one of them was really around how volunteers can provide feedback to and engage with management more regularly. So within parks, liaising with rangers or whether people like yourself, how can we do that more regularly?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. It's a good question, and something that I'm keen for us to make sure we get right. So this is what I would hope is happening across the state, and if it's not, I'm happy to hear this about it via our network of staff. But each of our friends groups should have a liaison ranger, and those liaison rangers should be working regularly with that group at a local level to help them manage projects and get access to parks to do work and deal with issues that need to be dealt with, whether it's access to materials or dealing with particular permissions they might need, or any work health safety issues that need to be checked off, any paperwork that needs to be completed, etc., etc. Above that, we've obviously got a network of district rangers, and we're getting the district rangers together this week, so I'm happy to have this conversation with them again as well, is that they should be meeting with friends groups at least on a quarterly basis to have a conversation with the president, at least to say, look, is there any issues that I need to be aware of? Is there anything that I need to be funneling up the chain of command in the organisation to make sure senior management's aware of it? And then above them, we have parks and wildlife managers in our 7 regions across the states. We've got a senior manager. They're all experienced. They've all have on-ground experience in managing parks across the state. My expectation is that they meet with presidents once or twice a year as well. And that varies because friends groups operate in different ways. Some of our more remote friends groups only get together remotely once a year, so they might meet our Parks and Wildlife manager in Adelaide once a year, so that it does have some variation in the frequency, and they obviously have responsibility for managing the districts in their regions, and our regions are all made up of 2 districts at least in each of the regions that manage the parks and reserves across the state. And then at an executive level, hopefully people are aware, but if not, I'll let you know. I'm actually on the FOPINC board. I attend board meetings. I'm as an ex officio officer, as the Director of National Parks. Stuart Paul, the Director of Regional Operations, attends also, and so does Marianne Healy. So we've got 3 executive level people who attend the FOPINC boards, along with some of the Marianne staff. So I think there's lots of opportunity for friends groups to interact with our staff, but I am keen to understand if friends feel that there are issues that they want to raise, or there are issues that are not being dealt with that they feel need dealing with, to let us know through that network, and we'll pay attention to it, because I'd reiterate what the Minister says. The volunteers are the backbone of community support for our parks and wildlife system, and we want to make sure that they get the attention they deserve and the support they need. And I'm committed as the director to make sure that that happens through our staffing arrangements.
Thanks, Mike. So just off the back of that then, yeah, absolutely, volunteers are the backbone. Duncan, what sort of programs are in place to recognise and reward volunteers?
That's always a problem in a lot of organisations, is that there aren't a huge number of such programs. However, I guess we can recognise groups and people through the e-newsletter that comes out. And there's another one due, I think, in January. The awards, I'm afraid COVID threw that in disarray in the last year or two, but we're discussing those at the moment about how we can regenerate those and get them going again. It's not so much the problem of issuing the awards, it's how we get them into the hands and recognise the people when they receive them. And of course, there's certificates of appreciation. The state government, I don't think in the last year or two they've had them, but in past years we've managed to get a whole stack of those, which we can send out to groups so that they can recognise their members through these awards, appreciations, certificates of appreciation. But you know, in articles, etc., that that go out, we always try to recognise as many of our groups and people as we can, but it is somewhat limited.
Thanks, Duncan. So possibly one of the most commonly raised questions by people in the lead up to the forum related to weeds, which I'm sure is no surprise to anyone on the screen right now. Weeds are a big problem, which many of you, I'm sure, spend a lot of time dealing with in your respective parks. And so the question is for you, Stu, how can volunteers get additional support, and what is the department doing to address weeds in parks?
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, it's a huge issue for us. Obviously, something that we've been grappling with, and all park agencies across the country and the environmental NGO sector have been grappling with for decades. And I think about, you know, the tireless effort and number of hours that volunteers and volunteer groups have put in through Friends of Parks, in our parks, to controlling and managing woody weeds, other weeds over the years. And our role, of course, is to make sure that that effort is sustained. And that areas can be rehabilitated, and that over time we see the change that we're looking for in terms of rehabilitation of the landscape. And you know, I've seen some areas of the state and some of our parks where, you know, I always ask the question when I'm out on the ground with our staff, you know, are weeds a problem? What are the weed issues that you have? And some areas are relatively weed free and undisturbed, and we don't need to put a lot of effort or investment into managing pest plants in some of our parks. So recently we're across the Simpson Desert, and that's probably one of those examples of a wild place that's in relatively intact. But then if I think of the Adelaide Malofty Ranges as the perfect example of a fragmented landscape where our parks are essentially islands in a broader landscape, of course, you know, weeds spread on the wind and by birds and through watercourses, and those vectors, if you like, for the spread of weeds don't respect park boundaries. So it's an ongoing challenge for us. And so look, part of the solution, I don't want to get too philosophical about it, part of the solution lies in raising community awareness and understanding around the impact of pest plants. Part of it lies in us making sure that we've got the resources in place to sustain the weed control effort where that's required. Part of it is very much about prioritising our efforts in weed control. So what are the weed species that are just starting to take hold in our parks? And with a relatively small amount of effort now, we can look to eradicate those species from parks so that they don't take hold. And I guess the flip side of that, where are the weed species that we've got having the greatest level of impact on the conservation and biodiversity values across our park system? And those are the areas that we should be focusing on. And I'm not telling the Friends anything new here, because I know Friends groups have been concentrating on this for many years. So look, I think, Nicole, the solution continues to lie partially in, of course, the terrific support that we have from our volunteer network, making sure that they are really well supported and guided through good planning. And that's where our rangers and our park service come in. Through initiatives like the Friends of Parks Grants program, I was fortunate to have a seat at the table to have a look at the partnership grants, the $500,000 worth of partnership grants that Mary Ann's coordinating the rollout of at the moment. And there are a stack of really great weed control focused on-ground work projects that have been proposed there, and that's $750,000 through the partnership grants and the small grants, as the Minister said, is a game changer for us. And we have modest but available, if you like, operating budgets across our park service, and we want to make sure that we're doing our bit. We're working closely with the Friends. And look, the other avenue, if we, without going into all the detail, of course, the other avenue is very much through our partnership and relationship with landscape boards. Landscape boards receive funding under the National Landcare program through the federal government, and the federal government has responsibilities to deal with threatened species and threatened ecological communities. They do that through funding our landscape boards through the National Landcare program, and some of that funding, of course, can be applied on public lands and in our parks. So it's not a straightforward answer, and there's a number of cogs in the wheel, if you like. But all of those are important initiatives, and we need to make sure that we stay on top of it with Friends support.
Thanks, Stu. Mike, is there a different avenue, or is there an avenue to allocate funding rather than having a competitive process with all the different groups competing against each other, noting that some groups have different capacities to apply than others? Is there a different way of doing things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Nicole. I'm not sure I definitively have an answer for the group today, but this one I'm prepared to explore and get some advice back to Friends groups through the Friends of Parks. I mean, we could allocate money directly to districts to work with Friends, but I'd have to check to see whether that meets the government's requirements for Friends of Parks grants. There's probably models of putting money out through different organisations, but I wouldn't want to commit to that without exploring how that would work. What we've tried to do is encourage our staff to assist the Friends groups to put their applications together, and I'm more than willing to even make that more explicit in terms of helping Friends. I mean, I don't want Friends to have to sit down and do a plethora of paperwork to get a simple $5,000 grant. We've tried to make that simple this year, and if that's too complicated, we need to look at that. The larger grants, I guess we have to be a bit more. We have to get more detail because we have to be more accountable. It is taxpayers' funding at the end of the day that we have to acquit. So we do need a level of detail that we can report on. But if the issue is that groups feel that the application process is too taxing for them to get funding, I'm happy to explore that, and I'm happy to explore if there's alternate mechanisms, but I wouldn't want to commit to that here and now.
Just building on that a little bit more, Mike, there's also a question around, or an observation, that allocation of funding to parks appears to be disproportionate, and I assume that's disproportionate to other areas of investment across the state. How is the decision made about what funding is allocated to parks?
I wish I had the answer to this question. But the reality is there's a whole maze, a matrix of decision making that goes on to determine allocation of funding for various projects. Now, if we're talking here about grant funding, well, that's based on pretty much on the applications and the application criteria and the grant criteria and the partners that grant groups, the groups get together to put their applications in. So that's the criteria we're working on this year for those grants. If we're talking about allocations from the department, the department gets allocated money from Treasury, obviously, and we have to allocate that based on our fixed costs and operating costs. And there's decisions made around projects that get funded through capital programs and government priorities. And at the end of the day, we're allocating money over a tax system, and the tax system's not equitable. It collects money in one part of the country and allocates it to another part of the country. I'd like to think that we, over time, have a reasonably balanced view of what needs to be done across the state and try and attend to most of the priority issues. So, if you look at our capital investment program this year, we've got projects nearly happening in every region across the state in terms of improving visitor facilities. Obviously, Kangaroo Island's had a major injection, but that's on the back of fires, and you expect that. And then the ongoing funding that we have for our staff and operating is pretty much based on a zero-based modelling exercise that's done regularly to cover off on our fixed salary and wages and operating costs.
Thanks, Mike. So I've just got a couple of other questions, and then I think what we might do is break for a few minutes before we proceed into our other presentations. So, Stu, this might be one for you. A major threat to our park is the number of kangaroos which now inhabit it. We believe they are a problem across many parks in South Australia. A statewide approach to reducing kangaroo numbers is urgently needed. Is anyone aware of plans to address this issue?
Yeah, I can provide a quick response, and others, my colleagues might add to that, Nicola. But there's no doubt that total grazing pressure and the impact of macropods or kangaroos on that is significant. If we think about the major herbivores in the landscape, particularly, I guess, south of the desert, up north, we're talking camels and horses and the like. But for most of our state, we're talking about deer, goats and kangaroos. It's really interesting when you talk to the community around kangaroos. If you're talking to the pastoral community or in the rangelands or in the cropping zones of the state, of course, landholders will see kangaroos as a pest, if you like, in the same light that they see goats and deer. If you're talking to the metropolitan or the peri-urban community, they see kangaroos as more of a wildlife species, I believe. And therefore, the social license to remove kangaroos, particularly from national parks, is a challenging issue and has been for us. But I think we've made some real gains there in more recent times. We've opened up most of the state now to the commercial harvest of kangaroos, which previously was really the domain, if you like, of the pastoral country and the rangelands. And we've got commercial field processors now operating in the lower southeast, through places like Chowler and the Pike River floodplain in the Murray lands. And I think we're looking at commercial field processes through the Flurio parts of the Adelaide Hills. So that's a good thing, and having that conversation with the community is a good thing as well. There's an extensive and expanding total grazing pressure management project that's led out of the Hills and Flurio Landscape Board, but we work very closely in partnership with them on that. And that deals with kangaroo total grazing pressure from the Barossa through to the Flurio. And removing kangaroos and reducing that grazing pressure across many of our other parks and regions of the state is a priority for us. And in some cases, it's work that our staff will do for us. It's work that contractors will do. I've spoken about commercial kangaroo processes. I recently had a look at a casuarina recovery program down the Coffin Bay Peninsula, where for the last 20 years we've been reducing the grazing pressure solely attributable to kangaroos, and we've seen a terrific recovery in the drooping she-oak population and community down there. So I think it's a conversation we're having with the community. We're putting a lot of work into it, and the recognition of the need to keep those kangaroo numbers down is certainly there. And can't remember the name of the volunteer, that we had with us, who spoke about Parawira being her favourite park and the work that the volunteer group does at Parawira. We've made Parawira is looking, in my view, terrific these days because we've been able to reduce that total grazing pressure over the last couple of decades. But further work to do.
If I could just add, Nicole, I'm committed also to including in all our new plans of management as we review them. We will put clauses in them to allow us to manage grazing pressure of natives. We do have to have an evidence base to take that decision, but we will make sure, and I'm committed to making sure that's included in all our new plans of management. So we have the mechanism. Some of our reserves don't allow that currently. As we review those plans, we'll make sure that mechanism to enable that work to happen is put into those new plans.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Look, folks, we've come to the end of that Q&A session. I think we covered quite a bit of different ground there of some of those key areas of interest that members have identified. So I'd like to thank Stu, Mike and Duncan for their participation in that section of today's forum. Thanks, folks. So what we're going to do, folks, is just break for 10 minutes. And what we'll do is let's reconvene at 11:15 sharp. This gives you an opportunity to grab a cuppa, go to the bathroom, etc. But when we come back, we're going to have two presentations. One will be from Chris Daniels about National Park City. And then we also have a presentation from Dirk Holman around sea lion monitoring and citizen science. So there'll be two great presentations. So I really hope you come back and join me then. So just sit tight. I'll just turn my camera off and the sound off for 10 minutes. We'll be back online at 11:15 sharp and we'll kick off with Chris Daniels. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to grab a cuppa, stretch your legs. I'd now like to welcome Professor Chris Daniels, Chair of Green Adelaide, to speak with us about National Park City. And Chris, welcome. I understand, I think Jill will be assisting with slides. So Jill, could I perhaps ask you to get the slideshow going and share your screen? And we'll kick off with Chris.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and thank you very much to Jill too for acting as my audio visual technical expert. I really appreciate it, and I'd also like to thank all of the Friends of Parks and also Marianne Healy and you too, Nicole, for inviting me here to talk about Green Adelaide and the National Park City concept. Next slide, please, Jill.
And Chris, just before you get into the flow, we've probably got about 15 minutes for presentation, and then I'd like to do some questions. Is that okay?
That's fine. Okay, I better talk very quickly then. So
you're good at that, and you do it. Good job.
Not a problem, Nicole. Okay, so I just want to run through why we have Green Adelaide and what's our case for change. Look at how Green Adelaide is actually structured around priorities, business plan and a landscape plan. Look at a couple of examples and finish up with National Park City. Next slide, please, Jill. The case for change is really, I think, obvious for everybody here in this room. What we've been seeing is a major increase in the world population. Really, over the last 100 years, it has increased by some 6 to 7 billion people. Since the 1930s, it's gone up by 5 billion people, and we're seeing it continue to increase. By about 2040, we should have about 11 billion people on the planet. And we're seeing a major move of those people into cities. In 2007, we passed the benchmark of 50% of the world's population occupying cities. And the graph in your top right-hand corner really shows this movement compared to various continents. And what's particularly important there is that Australia is not represented. You see, many of the continents have been going from 50% to 80%. We're already at 85%, and that's particularly the case here in South Australia, where we know that more than 85% of the population of the state live between Victor Harbor and Port Wakefield. So we've had this great concentration of people in the cities, and we're seeing the emergence of mega cities. Next slide, please. And one of the great things about cities, or the challenges about cities, is that we've tended to put them on the very best possible land. And Adelaide's no exception. Adelaide, the Adelaide Plains, Mount Lofty Range region is a biodiversity hotspot. It traditionally consisted of a range of different ecosystems that have appeared as a result of different soil types, of different rainfall, and of their position relative to each other. So we have wound up with at least 6 major ecosystems in our particular city that vary from calitris pine mallee scrub to the north, grasslands, samphire swamps, the grey mangrove, of course, reed beds, the rivers that run east to west, and then the iconic grey box open woodland that runs down through reed beds to the sand dunes. And each of these separate areas had their own assemblage of plants and animals, so created this biodiversity hotspot that we know as the Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges region. Next slide, please. And this diversity is really quite spectacular. The region contains about 60% of the state's birds, about 30% of the state's plant species, and between 20 and 25% of the state's mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, all in an area that's a fraction of 1% of the area of the state. So if we could act to preserve biodiversity anywhere in South Australia, the location is right here. Next slide, please. And we have therefore got a role and responsibility to preserve biodiversity for its own sake, because there's so much around us in our own city. But biodiversity serves many other functions that particularly are of benefit for us. It stabilizes ecosystems, so therefore provides ecosystem services that enable us to survive on the planet. So it gives us our fresh air, our fresh water, clean soils that provide us all of the food and pharmacological agents that we need to get by. Biodiversity also provides us with resilience, so enables the system and therefore us to recover from serious challenges. And these can be short-term, like fire or flood, or much longer-term, like pollution, climate change, and the other forms of human impact. So we really need biodiversity to give us that bounce back, if you like, from challenge. It provides us with agriculture, it provides us with our pharmaceutical and medical necessities, as I've already mentioned, and it also helps benefit through tourism and recreation. So it actually supports the economy. Next slide, please. A really good example about how the nature aspects support our economy comes from koalas. In a recent study, or 2014 study in the Conversation, I should say, the article referred to koalas as being worth $3.2 billion to the Australian economy. Koalas led to the direct and indirect employment of some 30,000 people. There's more than 1,000 koalas in various sanctuaries all around Australia. And then there's a whole massive indirect support network through tourism and so forth, hospitality. Koalas also are part of our national identity. As you can see here, any visiting politician automatically gets a koala to hold when they land into Sydney. So they're an incredibly important part of our economy. Next slide, please. And it's not just these aspects that make biodiversity in cities really important. We know from COVID that biodiversity gives really important personal and health benefits. So we really need it for our mental health. We really need it for our physical health, getting out in open space. It also creates a sense of place. We are Adelaideans, South Australians, Australians, because of the wildlife we interact with on a daily basis. So we are who we are because we know the sound of magpies, because we have huntsmen on our walls in the evenings. We live with noisy miners and kangaroos and other animals that can continually challenge us. So they give us an enormous amount of benefit in terms of sense of place. And we use both the health benefits and the sense of place in a number of ways to connect people with nature. So we have nature play, we have healthy parks, healthy people, we have nature prescriptions, now all around getting us out and about and in nature in our own backyards within the city. Next slide, please. So you'd think it would be really easy for a city to embrace nature, but it isn't. There's a number of significant impediments to us really engaging with nature in an urban context. The first is a culture of fear. We have a culture around lethal animals, around fire, and most recently around injury and death from falling trees. We've had some terrible incidences where people have been injured or even killed when trees have fallen down in storms. But they're incredibly rare, and in fact, the risk of injury from wildlife, trees or fire is significantly smaller than the risk associated with not having strong greenery in the city and dealing with issues like climate change, like increasing temperature, increasing wind and so forth. Next slide, please. And this fear leads us to have a fairly poor response to how we develop our cities. We have undergone a lot of urban infill, larger houses on smaller blocks. This has the advantage of limiting sprawl, so we don't encroach into really good agricultural land, but at the same time, it presents challenges to big trees and to open space. We're also seeing a really significant change in the recreational practice by children as they spend more time on electronic devices and less time outdoors. These in the end lead to a decrease in urban biodiversity, a decrease in water recycling, water retention and more discharge, and of course a major increase in energy demand. And so we wind up with communities that look sadly like these. The top right-hand corner is actually a suburb here in Adelaide. Next slide, please. And this is a classic picture of what we've seen happening in the city. On the right-hand side, we have an older suburb, small house, large block, lots of trees, lots of green. On the left-hand side, a newer suburb, one significant tree is retained, lots of black roofs, large houses, and of course, biodiversity usage on the left is very, very much reduced. Energy demand is much greater, and much more water is lost through runoff from the hard surfaces. Next slide, please. So as a result of these real challenges that we have about conserving biodiversity, about retaining the ecosystem services for nature, and around how we ourselves create our sense of place associated with nature, the government incorporated the Green Adelaide Landscape Board as part of the reformation of the Landscape Act 2020. And the Green Adelaide Landscape Board is charged with the vision of creating a cooler, greener, wilder, more climate resilient Adelaide that celebrates our unique culture, or it should be cultures. So we start, of course, with the cultures of the Ghana people from some 50,000 years ago, through to the European, the German, and now the cultures from people who come all around the world. And this image was created by Alan Sumner, a Ghana elder, that really reflects all of the different components that exist within the city, and particularly within Adelaide. So we have the beaches and the marine environment, the rivers, the people in the centre, the built structures, the lakes, trees, and so forth. And it shows that a city is part of an integrated whole with so many different components, but each forming its own unique ecosystem. Next slide, please. And so Green Adelaide Landscape Board was created under its own act, and it has 7 key priorities: to look at coastal management, to manage water resources and wetlands in creeks, streams, artificial wetlands, as well as natural ones, to green up the streets, the parklands and the suburbs, to create habitat for wildlife and also deal with cooling, to incorporate biodiversity and water sensitive urban design into the built structure, to manage native and local biodiversity, manage pests and plants, and of course to undertake nature education in all its broadest forms to engage community with the importance of the nature around us. Next slide, please. And so Green Adelaide has got these 7 priorities, and it delivers those through a wide range of iconic programs. So 4 here are the greening our streets and backyards, and addressing the issues around aged street trees and the replanting of trees as we see urban infill and increased densification. We have the National Park City, which I'll come to in just a moment. We are rewilding our rivers and coastline, and that's a primary focus on the River Torrens. And we are strongly reconnecting with Ghana culture. And here we have a cultural burn that took place in the parklands last year. And this is a really important part because engaging with the Ghana people, we are able to share their knowledge and their wisdom and have input into all aspects of our plan and all aspects of our educational programs going forward. Next slide, please. So a really quick example of one of these major programs we are doing is undertaking a complete survey of the trees and the heat island effects across all 17 councils that comprise metropolitan Adelaide. So we're using thermal injury and LiDAR mapping to identify the hotspots and correlate the level of temperature increase on various hot days with the level of greening and canopy cover here. And this enables us to give a really, really clear and detailed view of the amount of green canopy across our area so that we can identify which areas need more plants and which areas are doing okay. Next slide, please. Oh, that's okay. So, and from this particular area and this particular study, we can also generate a baseline. We can then be able to make informed decisions about where we should be doing our investment and what our investment should look like. So it's not always all about trees. Sometimes it's all about how we will use rooftops and biodiversity sensitive urban design, how we use median strips and footpaths as well to augment the green across the city. We know that there are some areas such as Mitcham and Burnside that seem to be doing quite well, whereas other areas, particularly in the north, are really struggling. So this will direct our investment into the future. Next slide, please. So some really quick ones. So we'll run through these very fast. It's a challenge to Jill. There are numbers of other activities that we are doing. We are identifying really important last vestiges of green space. So Pelican Point, Mutton Cove, Torrens Island, as some of the Friends groups would be well aware of the importance of these areas. We are looking at connecting various small parks along Dry Creek to the northern areas networks, which include the Greenfields wetlands. We are working with the Field River and the Glenthorne National Park to the south, with Aldinga Scrub and the Wash Pool further south. And the area that will be a big challenge for us remains the Hills Face zone. Next slide, please. We are looking to really improve the green infrastructure. So we've just started a major program called the Green Heart with the City of Adelaide to see about how we can green up walls, roofs and footpaths and interconnect them. And we've got some wonderful examples already. The two on the right there are Bowden Brompton, which have seen some magnificent green walls. And we look at areas all around the world to get ideas about what we could do and what we can do better. Next slide, please. Biosensitive urban design and water sensitive urban design are really the next step. We know that water sensitive urban design has been around for a while, and it can be as simple as collecting rainwater and using culverts to support trees, through to far more complicated systems where you can collect water off roads, pump it to the roofs and percolate it down walls. But this sort of interconnection gives us the power to actually design gardens that occupy the heart space, but will also support birds and butterflies and other animals. So you kind of improve the ecosystem in areas normally regarded as devoid of life. Next slide, please. We are looking to go green cleverly. So it's about right tree, right place, right time. We know that there have been many plantings of trees that are not surviving with climate change. Silver birch are a really good example. So it's about identifying really important native species and also others from around the world that will be really adapted to our changing climate. And of course, as I've already said, it's about shrubs and grasses as well as trees. Next slide, please. We can look at how others retrofit, and there's some brilliant examples around the world of the reclamation of drains, such as in Vienna in the top left-hand corner, and other areas around the world that I just don't have time to go into now. But these systems that have retrofitted and reclaimed space can be really, really valuable. So just because a piece of land is in a very poor state of repair doesn't mean it can't be improved. Next slide, please. We're talking also with many of our partners about how we can use multiple function for open space. So my favorite example is the picture right in the top middle there, which is the southeast corner of the parklands. It has a historical elm avenue from the 1860s, sports fields, but very extensive replantings of the native grasslands that were there. This area then becomes useful for a wide range of purposes by a wide range of individuals and organisations. And given that we have such limited open space, this is really important. We can't just always allocate one piece of land for one particular function. And we need to look at other areas that have not traditionally been used as green open space, but different places around the world are starting to do this. So look at car parks, golf courses, schools, and even cemeteries. And some of you would be well aware of cemeteries in Denmark that are incredible green spaces. Next slide, please.
Chris, can I just pause and interrupt?
Yeah, I'm just finishing up now. Two more slides.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Well, 1 second.
Good man.
Rewilding rivers and beaches are a second important component. And in fact, we know the creation of wetlands have been a really big part. Next slide, please. And of course, it's about managing animals. We know that there's a large number of animals that are very difficult to manage, particularly because people form very close bonds with them, such as koalas. And of course, other animals will change their behaviors. And I particularly like the picture of the corellas up at the top left-hand corner, which was a cold day in Sydney, and they discovered the traffic lights as places to warm, which was really good for the birds, but really bad for the cars below. Next slide, please. And I think this is my last one. So the final solution then is the creation of a national park city, which incorporates all of these things. It incorporates the why we need to look at biodiversity, and it incorporates all of these different aspects to do it. So we phrased that question, let's make Adelaide a biodiversity city, let's make it a national park city, but what does it mean? And it means something different to the approach that London has taken, which is to be very much a grassroots, community-based approach, a bottom-up approach. We have many organisations and individuals involved, we have government involved, and we have prepared our case, which has gone to the National Parks City Forum. We hope that for all of these reasons and for all of these different characters, that Adelaide will become a national park city. And then in the future, this sort of title can be used to focus all of our interest and approach into how we can improve biodiversity in our particular region. And I'll leave it there. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much for that, Chris. That was a great, tour of how Adelaide can become a national park city. I note that in the chat during that section, a number of things were identified, including some existing challenges to achieving that. So, for example, planning laws that remove our big trees, development of the parklands, litter and bad practices in places like Garden Island and Mutton Cove. And I also note there was a number of comments along the way about the dolphin sanctuary and dolphins. And I've been just trying to find an answer to that while we've been listening to Chris, and I might just quickly throw to Marianne Healy. Marianne, if you're there, just to provide a bit of, she's popped it into the chat. Thanks, Marianne. So regarding the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary and Marine Parks, yes, it is part of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. All of the dolphin investigations and updates can be found on that website, so you can go there for more information. Thanks, Marianne. So now I might hand over to Dirk Holman. So Dirk is the Marine Coordinator for Western Eyre Peninsula National Parks and Wildlife Services, and Dirk is going to talk to us about sea lion monitoring and citizen science. So Dirk, fire away.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. As was said, my name's Dirk Holman, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a Marine Coordinator for the Eyre and Far West region. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Yeah, this is obviously part of the coast that I manage. This is out on the Bunda Cliffs, which I spend a fair bit of time out in that. I'm lucky enough to spend a fair bit of time out in that region. Just for a bit of background, I manage state and Commonwealth parks basically from Elliston through to the WA border. So you can see the state parks here in sort of the orange crossed section, Great Australian Bight Commonwealth Park. Then we've got more state parks here, the Noites Archipelago around, Noites Archipelago is further up, West Coast Bays around Streaky, the Investigator Park around Elliston, and then this Western Eyre Commonwealth Marine Park. A lot of my work in recent years has been around sea lions, and there's a few reasons for that. Australian sea lions are Australia's rarest seal species. For the last 4 decades, they've been in consistent and rapid decline across their entire range from South Australia all the way up through Western Australia. They're higher order predators, so they sit at the top of the food chain. So they'll give us an indication on how healthy our oceans are and on how well our marine parks are performing. But also they're one of a few marine mammals that spend part of their life on land. So we can research them with minimal equipment, as opposed to trying to research, say, fish species or dolphins that spend their entire lives at sea and are quite hard to survey. The department has recently established an Australian sea lion working group with its own sort of focus on projects to monitor and research the species. This is a map of the 40-odd sea lion colonies that we monitor regularly, and you can see that the lion's share of them are on Western and Southern Eyre Peninsula, and they're almost exclusively restricted to offshore islands. Again, you know, why do I focus on sea lions? You can see that they've declined by 4.4% per breeding season, which is 18 months on average, or 78% over 3 generations of the species, 25% over the last 10 years. So by whatever metric we measure it, they're declining rapidly and consistently, and that's across their entire range. So, so much so that 11 months ago, on December the 23rd last year, they were uplisted to endangered under the EPBC Act. There's less than 10,000 animals in South Australia, and the breeding colonies were a really important part of the design criteria for the state marine park sanctuary zone. So we really want to get a handle on not only what's happening out there in these colonies, but start to investigate why it's happening as well. We published this paper earlier this year, and a lot of the uplisting advice was based on this paper, but it basically quantified the trends in abundance of the sea lion. As part of this paper, you can see these are sites that we monitor regularly, and you can see that there's an overwhelming trend of decline pretty much across most, if not all, of the colonies, which is kind of alarming. Case in point is the pages between Kangaroo Island and the Fleurieu, which is one of our largest colonies. You can see back in the early 2000s, it was producing 600 pups, and now it's a survey early this year and measured only 200 pups. So that, and you can see by the trend line that population is almost in free fall at the moment. Australian sea lions are a really unique species. They don't breed every 12 months. They breed every 17.6 months on average. However, that can change by a month or two. We had a couple of the West Coast colonies, Jones and Nick Bodan Island, that started breeding 2 months earlier than scheduled for this year. We've got no idea why. They also, all the colonies also breed independently of each other. They're all on different breeding timelines. So at the moment, we've got Dangerous Reef, which breeds for about 9 months because it's our largest colony. That's peaking, whereas others just south of it, say Albatross Island, that's finished. The ones out west are yet to start. So we don't know why this is part of their strategy, but it makes surveying them incredibly difficult because we have to be there at a specific time to measure pups. We use pup production as a proxy of population health. So when we're out there surveying pups, we know that for the first 4 months of their life, at least 4 to 5 months of their life, the pups are always going to be on land. So they're always going to be available to be counted. Whereas any other animals, juveniles, adult males, adult females. They'll spend days at sea foraging. So, if you land one day, you might have half the animals out to sea foraging. And then, if you landed the day after, they might all be back. So you're going to get a false indication of the population. But with pups, we know that they're always going to be there to be counted. So that's what we use as the proxy for population health. Even more complicated is that the abundance is inconsistent across their entire range. We've got small colonies at the Bunda Cliffs with 10 and under pups next to Noit's Reef here, which has over 100 pups. There's Jones Island here that has between 10 and 20 pups. Olive Island used to have around 100. It's down to 70 now. And because the sea lions feed on the bottom, they're sort of limited in how far they can travel. So they feed on the seafloor. So they're constantly diving, coming up, breathing, diving down and foraging. So they're limited in how far they spread. So the foraging strategies vary between the colonies. So as an example, there's 2 islands right next to each other called Lilliput and Blefuscu, which is just south of the Franklin Islands. Now the animals on Lilliput pretty much all forage inshore, whereas the animals on Blefuscu, which is 5 kilometres away, almost exclusively forage offshore. So the threats that these animals are facing not only could be regional, but they could be local. So getting a handle on why they're declining isn't something that we can apply to the entire species across their range. We've sort of got to monitor and then overlay the threats of what's happening at each colony. Like they've sort of got to be managed at a colony level. They also demonstrate extreme site fidelity. So the females will only come back and give birth at the colony that they were born at. So that means, like with small colonies that are declining, they won't get refreshed from the outside. Other animals won't come in and give birth and refresh that colony. So they sort of need to regenerate from within. So that's why it's really important that we get a handle on some of the threats, especially with some of these smaller colonies, because they're very vulnerable to extinction. As I mentioned, most of the colonies are either on offshore islands or at the base of inaccessible cliffs. You see, this is a colony at the base of the Nullarbor Cliffs. Just for scale, I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen, but there's a sea lion there, and you can just see there's 2 of us standing there, flying the drone, trying to get a handle on what's happening. This is how we used to do it when I first took the job. In 2012, we used to try and peer into the colonies from the tops of the cliffs, but we knew that the data we were getting was poor. It was also pretty dangerous. This is one of the reasons we stopped doing it, because you could find yourself out on a piece like that, and that could go at any time. So in 2017, I started using a drone or a UAV to survey the colonies. So essentially now I can sort of walk to the edge of the colony. You can see H is the home base where I launched the drone from. I can send it over the edge and down, and program the camera to take a photo every 3 seconds, and then just fly it back and forth over the colony at different heights, getting different angles, so we can get 100% visual access of that colony. So here's one image taken as the drone was coming down. This is a cave that we'd never seen before. We sort of knew it was there, but you couldn't see it. It was obscured from the cliff line when we were trying to look in, and you can just sort of see some of the animals dotted through here. This is a zoom in on that image, and you can see that there's mum, pup, mum, pup, pup, mum, pup, mum, pup, pup, pup. So these are all animals that we were missing before, and the Bunder Cliff surveys that we're capturing now since 2017. So that's a single image taken in this. That's where the cave sits. It's a single image taken in that area, and we'll end up with say 300 or 400 images for each colony, and then we'll put it into some software which essentially stitches all the photos together, and it builds this 3D model of the colony, and the animals are spread all the way through here. So like I said, we can now zoom in on those and you can get 100% visual access, whereas before we could literally just see like a little area here where animals might wander in and out. So once that's done and we get back, and I get back to the office, I'll literally go through each colony and each photo one by one and count and classify each animal and enter it into the data. You can see here when I first started doing the job, when we were doing clifftop surveys, we were sort of averaging under or around 20 pups over 21 sites. This first spike you can see here is when I found an extra couple of colonies using a helicopter. And then this spike here is in 2017 when I started using the drone. And you can see the increase in pup numbers, so from 20 to 80. Last year, the pup numbers were down a bit, but another thing with sea lions is that their productivity will oscillate between summer and winter. So that summer survey, the numbers were down a bit. However, the 2020 winter survey, you can see that we're up to nearly averaging 100 pups each survey, which is the best numbers that we've recorded out there. So because they work so well, the drones work so well at the Bunder Cliffs, we thought, can it work elsewhere? And this is Dangerous Reef, just off Port Lincoln. It's the biggest sea lion colony in the world. It's about the size of a footy field. It's essentially just a rock pinnacle. But in peak breeding season, there'll be over 1,000 animals on that little piece of rock. The advantages of drones is that first of all, we minimize disturbance. I'm not sure if you can see in the top corner, there's the boat sitting there that we essentially pull up, we anchor, and we launch the drone and fly the island, and the animals don't even know we're there. We also have a reviewable data set. So we've got this imagery and all the classifications stored on hard drives, as opposed to traditional ground counts, when my only memories of it are, going back to my field diary and looking at my notes. It also reduces observer bias, like by having experienced counters out there versus non-experienced counters. And obviously all the surveys are flown under research permits and animal ethics permits. So we designed the flight program before we go out in the field, and I fly this exact same flight path every single time. You can see it's flying at 40 meters, at 4 meters a second. We overlap the front and the side images by 75%. So there's enough pixel recognition to stitch the photos together. You can see how much area we covered, the distance, how long it takes, how many images. So this is all just in the apps. It's a $15 app that you use to fly the drone. And that's a picture of that's actually Noit's Reef, but that's a completed survey. And all those little dots you can see is where the drone's taken a camera. It's a camera location where the drone's taken a photo.
Can I just interrupt quickly and just see whether you're heading towards the end? As interesting as this is, we're just due to wind up around 12 and just being a bit conscious of time.
Yep, I can skip through. Yep. So this is like a single image pulled from dangerous reef. If we zoom in, we can see mum with her pup, adult males, more mums with their pups. So it really gives us an insight into what's happening in that colony. Again, another shot with all the pups spread out as they get a bit older. This, I can skip through this. This is what I mean about reviewable data. This is, we did it, we flew the surveys every month for an entire breeding season. So these are all the animals at the start of the breeding season. The yellow is a pup. So we had one pup in July, and then you can see the red dots are, red and purple dots are mum's nursing pups. So you can see there's a few more animals starting to build up in August. September, there's more animals, and you can see that the yellow ones are independent pups. So they're starting to move around the island a bit. October, again, the animals are building up. You can see all the mums nursing pups are sort of around these boulders and rock crevices for protection, and the independent pups are starting to spread around the island. November, the same. You can see that the independent pups are becoming more mobile. By December, they're starting to head towards the edge of the island. January, they're essentially in the water, and February, they're all over the island and in the water. So that's when we call the survey off. I guess this is quite timely that I got asked to present to Friends of Parks, because Friends of Parks are one group that we're going to target with a new citizen science project that we've developed called Sea Lion Spotter. We're still in the testing phase at the moment, but essentially what we'll be asking people to do is do exactly what you just saw then, is you'll be able to enter the portal through here, and you'll be throwing up images like this, and you'll be able to just click and classify. So you'll be able to click on all these pups. There'll be like a dot that'll appear, and then you'll go to the next image, and you'll be able to click on pups, adult males, adult females. So you not only will you be helping contribute to understanding what's going on in Australia's biggest sea lion colony, you'll also get an insight into what's happening out there that not many people get to see. So we're really excited about releasing it, and we hope that we'll be able to release it to the Friends of Parks groups once we've got it up and going. And just to finish on, I thought I would finish with a cute black pup that's under a week old at a colony that we surveyed last week. So that's it for me. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Dirk. And you possibly have one of the best jobs in the whole wide world, certainly in the best location, that's for sure. But thank you very much for sharing that really comprehensive understanding of how you go about gathering data, particularly data that's reviewable and useful, and helps us keep track of these gorgeous animals. Folks, we're coming to the end of our forum today, and I know there's a number of comments in chat. And Dirk, I might just get you to stop sharing your screen if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I know that there are a number of comments and questions in the chat, and we'll take those on notice where we haven't been able to answer them today. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, for participating. Duncan, I'd like to hand over to you now, if you don't mind, just to make some final words and close us off for today.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Nicole. Yeah, I'd like to thank our speakers, Minister Spears, Sharon Smith, Chris Daniels and Dirk Holman. And especially, Nicole, I'd like to thank you for facilitating the day. I have to say, I think you're one of the state's best facilitators. I enjoy going to all your events.
Thank you, Duncan, bless you.
And most of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I know you'll agree we've had some interesting presentations, and hopefully you've got something out of it. And we will be sending out a feedback survey to each of you, and we would very much appreciate if you could fill that in and tell us what you thought of the format today, because as I said, we just don't know what the future is going to hold, whether we're ever going to be able to have a face-to-face one meeting again in a matter of years' time, or whether we have to continue with this type of meeting. So it does help us if you can fill in the forms. So thank you all very, very much, speakers, Nicole, and everybody that's here today, and particularly to the DEW senior staff who've spent the day with us, or the morning with us, and answered a lot of our questions.
Thanks very much, Duncan, for those closing words, and thank you all for attending, and good luck. All the best with your activities in your parks, and you don't need to tell me to get out in them because I'll be there, but I hope you have a very safe and lovely Christmas. Thanks, everyone.